Skype conference on a day which is beautiful outside. It's about, at least in Princeton, it's about 85 or so. The spring is catching up, and probably we're close to summer. So it's great to be with you guys. And thank you, JP, for facilitating this. I think this is great.
Thank you.
We wish we could converse online, which would have been great. But I think what we should do start with is just a brief intro of who you are, and Isaac and Richard. So just start with your brief intros, and then talk about what you actually do, and then we can go deep into those activities or those passions.
Okay, cool. Well, Richard Worthy. Was I supposed to do that part?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, cool. I am a writer primarily, but I recently produced a short film with JP here. And other than that, my background, I've done a little bit of PA work prior to shooting this. I wrote another short film prior to shooting this. That was just for the 40-hour film competition here in Atlanta. That was fun. That was a boot camp. But once you step outside of that boot camp and you go out into the battle of actually making a film, you learn so much more. So that's the gist of it. We're in the process now of developing for the feature, and also turning down bad deals. You learn a little bit about that. And we're also hopefully going to make a slight or a small film festival run if festivals come back to life.
Great.
Okay. Should I take it away, Swami? Okay.
Yes,
My name is Isaac Wilkins. I have been working in the film industry for 19 years now. I work primarily as a what's known as a line producer. So I do the preliminary budgeting, scheduling, all that, so that my producers can know exactly what they need to raise in terms of funds. Then I come back around once we're headed towards real life pre-production. That's when I consider myself boots on the ground. I usually come in 4 to 5 weeks before, and we get all the elements that we don't have, finish up the casting, get the equipment, find the locations, get the whole infrastructure ready. Then we go make the movie. I oversee, I'm the head of physical production, as I like to say. And then I wrap it up, spend 2 weeks making sure everyone got paid, everything that got damaged gets fixed, all of the paperwork is ready for my producers to then, be ready to take it out, go to distribution. And then, 2 weeks after, I'm done. I'll still be answering questions and helping out with documents and everything. But, my role is done once the film heads into full-time post-production.
fantastic. So just so that you also, on the record, let me introduce myself too. My name is Narayan Swami. It's a bit long, so people call me Swami to be shorter. And I'm a poet, and primarily a poet, and cinema has been my passion since my youth, since my days of youth. And I collaborated. I would love to make a film. But that because of several reasons, I obviously did not get into the actual part of filmmaking. But I did collaborate with filmmakers like JP and Raj, who made Malaysian, and others too. And for Malaysian, I was called a creative consultant because right from the scripting process till the final version, I was involved in providing inputs, most of them which the director accepted. So that was great. And I love watching films, world cinema, right from Bellatar to the latest filmmakers who have made some fantastic films. And right from Robert Bresson to Godard and all these great folks. So cinema has been my passion. And one day I would definitely want to make something like Costa Gavras does.
Mm.
That's fast, racy kind of filmmaking. But yeah, I'm waiting for that opportunity. And I should thank JP for getting me into this conversation with you guys. So
My pleasure, man.
thank you, thank you. So let's start with Richard. I know you said you're a writer, so that's why I felt that affinity towards you, because I'm also in the same category as writing. I've not done any production yet, so obviously I would like to learn more from Isaac. So from Richard, from your experience as a writer, primarily, what do you write about? I mean, do you adapt already existing stories to a screenplay, or you write something that is on your own and then turn it into a screenplay? What exactly do you do?
You know, good question. Well, every writer, honestly, in my opinion, probably follows a similar path. Um, they say write what you know, but it's really basically writing what you believe to be true.
Mm.
So while I may be
Mhm.
comprising short stories, it's all experience. It's other people's experiences, and it's a culmination of the movie that I ultimately want to see. And it is a little self-serving to start off, because if you're not interested in what you're writing, then your reader isn't either.
Yep.
So that definitely needs to translate. So I would say that I am really into the supernatural.
Mm.
I would say that most of my stories have a hint of the supernatural, some more so than others. But I would say that that's a genre that I'm very, very interested in. I also like the thriller suspense aspect of storytelling. I think that it's important for my audience to try to think a little bit while I'm telling the story. So those are sort of the aspects of my writing that I try to magnify when I get an opportunity. And yeah, that's kind of what I write.
So you made two good points, right? One is a writer should write what he believes in, one, and the second one, what he experiences, right? And as a part of belief also comes what you see from others, or
Right.
what you hear from others, and what you talk about, right? So interestingly, you talked about supernatural. So do you believe in supernatural stuff, or how does that go along with your line of thinking?
Yeah. So I have a Christian background. So
Hmm.
I have a relationship with God, and that's kind of the basis, I think, of any type of supernatural belief, is to have a belief in something bigger outside of yourself. So I do have that. I don't really have a fear of it. So I can really appreciate all aspects of the supernatural. You know, I can like The Sixth Sense. I love Candyman growing up. I also, one of my favorite movies is Contact.
Mm.
So I think that it can have a lot of different faces. The supernatural. It isn't necessarily faith based, and it isn't necessarily based on anything nefarious either. So yes, I believe that in life we are having a human experience as spirits. So yes, it's there for me.
Great. No, that's really good to know, because what you bring is diversity, right? And that diversity of when people talk about these supernatural things or paranormal things, usually they talk about devils, ghosts, and all that stuff. But I like the interesting point that you make about what is supernatural. It's a guiding force for the humanity, right? It's something that guides us to our future, or it's basically behind us or above us, and watching us, basically, right? And we humans, you look at the current situation of corona, right? We all feel so timid, so helpless, right?
Yeah.
In this thing that's happening. So obviously there is something that's guiding us and helping us. So that's great to know. And I believe, so I have to hear it from you. Now, do you think uh, this this element that is there, whether you call it nature, whether you call it supernatural, force or whatever. Uh, how do you think this is going to influence on the smallest aspects of our life to the largest aspects of our life? So to specific, to universal. Have you had any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Now, are you talking about with our current climate, or just overall as an experience?
Overall, I mean,
Overall.
overall. For example,
Um,
I mean, I've not read. I'm sorry. I should have read your stories or read your writings before we actually started this conversation, but I didn't get a chance to do that. So I was just trying to extract what your spectrum of thinking is.
yeah. No, that's fine. I mean, most of my work is in public anyway. We've got, one project that we're working on now that it's probably being shared anyway. So I don't have anything public for people to really dig down deep into. But I like that question, man. When you talk about the supernatural aspect and a smaller component, to me it is first off, you can call it luck, you can call it I don't know, magic. Um, Anytime you are unaware of how something has occurred, I think that type of recognition starts with the supernatural. So it's small as you experience it, but it is large before you leave your house, right?
Hmm.
So the overall
That's a
thinking
good
that you
point.
have in terms of how you are maneuvering and interacting is the biggest component of that supernatural aspect. You know, so everybody's got a gift, right? Everybody's got a talent. Um, some people actualize it, some people don't actualize it. If you have that particular belief, I think that you have a belief in the supernatural, because if you can acknowledge something as a gift, then you know that it didn't come from you.
Hmm.
So I think it's a philosophy in a broad span, but also it's moment to moment if you've embraced the philosophy.
Great. A great answer. Thank you for that. Now, coming back to translating that work into films,
Okay.
right? So can you talk about one or two experiences of yours? So how you translate what you've written on the page, on a white paper, into what is on the celluloid, what is on the screen? How does that journey go?
Okay. So first off, it's really, and I don't mean to minimize the process because it's taxing to actually sit down, with a blank piece of paper and a pen and anything that comes to your mind, right? So it's an effort to actually put something to paper. But once you do, it's a little bit out of your hands because it's a collaboration after that point.
Hmm.
It's very important that you have people with you that also want to see it come off the page.
Okay.
Once that happens and you are able to build a team, coming to life is it starts with casting.
Hmm.
Um, as soon as your words are spoken by a human, it becomes a real thing. I don't care what you say. I know it's a fictitious story, but it becomes real at that point. So I know some writers like to do table reads, which is a really good thing to do prior to actually filming. But I would say that it's a solo mission until you are recruited by a team, in a sense. Sometimes you're fortunate enough to be the one recruiting for your team, but ultimately it takes a team to bring it to life. Um, Once that happens, and I learned this from our magnificent director on our project. A film is three things: it's a script, then it is shot, and lastly, it has to be finished.
It has to
So
be what? Sorry, I missed the last one.
it has to be finished. It has to happen in
Finished. Yeah.
post. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Post. Yeah.
you can write it, but it has to get shot, and then it has to get cleaned up and turned back into what you wrote.
Mm.
Hmm.
So that's the gist of the process, and it's a really fun thing, man. Which is really why I advocate for you to go ahead and grab a camera, man, or at
Yes.
least take the time to shoot something and not share it. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, great. No, thank you. So hold on to that thought. I would come back to you. I would come back to you to ask a question about how do you. So before you start writing, would you actually think about how it's going to be visualized or how it's going to be translated into a camera language or not? Hold on to that thought. Now let me go to Isaac to
Okay.
see what his experiences are and so you said you are a line producer, right? And so a line producer, as you have indicated, looks at budgets, schedules, pre-production, etc., etc., right? So let's start with this point. Let's say Richard has given you a script, right? So how, as a line producer, would you play a role in translating that into a film?
Yeah, great question. Um, well, the first thing that I do is I, uh, I do what's called a script breakdown. So in the olden days, I would print it out, and just as I was trained to, I had like my nice little pencil case with different colored pencils. So you assign different elements to each colored pencil. So like I'd underline in red for every cast member that was in it. I'd underline in green for whenever there were different extras in a scene. Underline in pink for stunts. And you make notes, you make questions, because you know, for example, maybe a character you're pretty sure is in the scene, but they're not named in the actual screenplay. So you're like, hey, is this guy still here? You know, you think, well, there probably must be background here. So how are we, you know, who and how many and all that. Once you've got that breakdown scene by scene and you've double checked your work with your director, your producer, whoever, then I punch all of that information into a scheduling program, and every scene has what you call a breakdown sheet. So it's like, you know, these are the cast in here, these are the stunts, these are the vehicles, these are the animals, background, etc. And then with that, then you know, you talk, you see how many days do you think we need to shoot this? How many days do you think we can afford? Probably. So then you create a day-by-day layout. That's called the strip board. Because it used to, again, like be, you know, you'd print things out, then you would actually cut out the strips for each scene and move them around. These days it's all done digital. So these days, instead of printing out the script, putting it in a binder, getting my pencil case, I have a program called, it's literally called Tagger. It's part of Final Draft, which is the, you know, industry standard for screenwriting. So then I'll highlight, you know, things, but it's exactly the same process. You put that together so that your days make sense. So, you know, you shoot out a location. You don't, you know, go back and forth between locations unless you absolutely have to. You try and start your weeks with day scenes, and then you end them with night scenes. You know, because that's the way it goes. You can't hop back from night to day very easily, because you need to have you know, at least 10 to 12 hours of what we call turnaround time from when people are dismissed from set to when they come back. And just try and make that make sense as much as you can to you. Then again, you go back to your writer, your director, producer, anyone who's on board, and you say, guys, does this seem right? Does this make sense as a schedule? It's always good. You don't always have a director on board at that point. Sometimes you just have producer, writer. But if there's a director, you can say, like, you know, you have an idea of what kind of pace you can shoot at. Does this make sense? You know, can you shoot, you know, does shooting 6 pages in a day seem about right for the pace you keep? Or is it getting too ambitious? If so, then let's look at adding a day, or let's look at, you know, moving things from one heavier day to a lighter day, that kind of thing. So once you've got that schedule, then you can start your budget. You can't do the budget without the schedule, because you need to know, how many days do I need this actor for? How many days will I need to rent a vehicle for? How many days will I need to rent a crane, what days have Steadicam. You talk about all of that. Then you start the budgeting process, and you really want to use specialized budgeting software instead of like Excel or something, because you need to have a program that can handle the complexity and how everything interrelates at different layers of the budget. And then with that, you create a draft. Your first draft of any budget, you need to have like a basic budget target. Like, yeah, guys, we think we can make this for $500,000. Your first draft of any budget should be at least be 50 to 100% over budget, because that first draft, you're putting everything on the table. You know, I always say, like, if your target is $500,000 and I give you a budget for, you know, $499,999, then I've screwed up, because I've, as line producer, decided to take certain things off the table, and that's a mistake. You know, we make those decisions together. You say, look, you know, this film is set in a very realistic environment. We don't need this much in art. We're just enhancing and tweaking reality instead of creating it. You know, or you say, well, look, I want to have the Steadicam stuff, but what's more important is just the performances. So maybe we can go handheld, save money. A good budget is not, you give me a script, I break it down, put it together, and give you a quote. It's a good budget is the result of good dialogue. It's a lot of you know, it's a lot of thoughtful dialogue back and forth. You go through different drafts, revisions. You play around. You say, look, maybe we can raise $500,000. Maybe we can only raise 250,000. Maybe we create another draft that's $1 million. So it's almost like you can sort of tweak different sliders, and you can look at different options. You can say, you know, if we can raise $1 million, here's what we get for it. You know, what can we sacrifice? What's most important to the bones of the story? And sometimes you say, yeah, we could do it for $1 million, and that would give us certain things that we'd like, but it will take us so much longer to raise the funds. And we want to make this sooner rather than later. Or, you know, or we just don't think like we can get $1 million for this story because people won't think it's commercial enough. So let's do the $250,000 version. Let's look at a $60,000 version, because some of the best films I've made have been made for that. You know,
That's a good point. Yeah.
So it's a fun process. It's not, people sometimes think a line producer is basically like an accountant, but it's more like you're getting to that point where left brain and right brain cross. And that's a very fun space for me.
The one question that I would want to ask you, and think about it while I go back to Richard, is you talked about a 250K budget, 60K budget, and a $1 million budget, things like that, right? So for now, the audience who are watching this are basically upcoming filmmakers. You know, they don't have that kind of budgets with them, right? So they're trying to be innovative, be inventive in finding out ways and means of cutting down the cost and expenses. For example, use natural light, don't use artificial lighting, use a digital camera, don't go for red and things like that. I mean, there's several aspects, right? And actually one of our Telugu filmmakers also tried this dogme. The dogme filmmaking technique that was introduced with the Danish filmmakers, Lars von Trier and all that. So just hold on, just think about it. So we want to introduce ways and means of economizing, bringing economy into this. And I agree with one great point that you mentioned. A line producer is not an accountant; he's a creative brain working with numbers, right? So that's a very good point. Thank you for that. So Richard, coming back to you. And now, of course, JP, you please feel free to interject me and ask questions that you think are more relevant. But what I wanted to ask Richard was, when you're writing something, right? Let's say you're writing a short story. Do you have that thought in your mind that this story needs to be told on the screen, and then so I need to do something, or I need to incorporate some elements into this so that it can be easily converted into a screenplay? And then once it is converted into a screenplay, I need to make sure that it can be translated onto the screen. So do you think about that process ahead of time, or just let loose your creativity to first write a story and then start working on that? How would you do that?
So I would say my ultimate primary medium would be screenplays. I have written a few short stories, and the truth is that before I write the script, I actually have the story kind of written down in a way. So I guess I start with all short stories, and
Mm-hmm.
once you are finished with the story, what you have to look at is how much of the story can I see, and how much of the story am I just inferring, and am I just feeling? Um,
That's a
Novels
great point.
have so much freedom with allowing you to explore every inner thought that a character is having. But on a screenplay in a movie, you have to show what they're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think that once you have a better understanding of the overall story that you really want to tell, it starts to shift in your mind to, okay, how do I show what I'm saying? Um, that's the first step. After that, I would say that you're also trying to consider how the audience is going to sort of feel about the things that you're saying, because your dialogue actually carries a lot more than what the person is thinking. They actually have to kind of explain how they feel at times as well. So it's a juggling match between showing what somebody is thinking and what they're feeling while they're talking. So it's a 3D aspect of your character that starts to lift off the page when you try to go into the screenplay format.
So if I may add, during March, okay, let me add, let the audience know that Richard and I collaborated on one of the movie. It's a proof of concept for a feature film called March the movie, and uh, there has been a great shift in the way you think or write, especially with March. There was certain aspect of producing that you mentioned that has changed after you made the film, right? And now you can write, put on a different hat where you're writing to the budget, which you couldn't do it before, or didn't think of it that way. How can you add to that? How it changed?
Okay, well, I think the first thing I want to say, says, considering that there may be some audience members who haven't had a producer hat on just yet, um, just get the story out and write what you're trying to write and worry about the budget later. All right, first off. But when you get that part out and you have to start looking at the budget, what I had to recognize is that some of the stuff that I wanted to see, and since I was self-funding it, I think that also changed a great deal about how I wrote it, right? So you have to think a little bit about what is it that I can actually have access to, and what is it going to be a stretch for me to get. So you think about your resources when you're writing, and once you've completed that, you just kind of pick and pull the spots that you can make work.
Great. Great. So, so and then I think I like that point which you made regarding writing and budget, right? So a writer should not have budget in mind before starting writing, because otherwise it will be like clipping his wings, right?
Yeah.
First, you need to let loose your creativity, grow your wings and start flying, and then see where we can land with respect to budget, right? So I also caught one good point from your earlier answer, which is you have to convert what the character thinks, right? You can write a lot about it on the paper, but you have to convert it onto the screen, which is actually the difficult thought, right? Because it's not easy to create a three-dimensional character on the screen, right? So, and I agree with you completely. And can you tell me one instance where you successfully did this with an example? For example, you can take one of your characters which you had created and then talk about it. Maybe that will be helpful to us.
Okay. So, wow. Let's see a particular instance. It's probably more of a tact that you kind of have to have, because you're going to do it with every single character at all times. But well, first thing that came to mind when you asked that was, I had a short that I wrote for a short competition here in Atlanta. They were asking people to write a film that could be shot for under $10,000. And it had to be under 15 pages. And you also had to submit a budget along with it. So what I started off with was I had a character that I really liked. I don't know if anybody's ever seen The Counselor. It's a relatively popular American film, but anyway, there's a character in there that has a cowboy hat on. It's played by Brad Pitt. And you don't really know what he's doing to the story, but he's a compelling character to just have pop up. So while I am first thinking, what do I want to see? I have to admit that most of your characters, when you first start writing them, are basically mannequins. They're nothing. You have to dress them up. So you have to give them a walk. You have to give them an accent. You have to give them a backstory that explains why they're in the room that they're in that day. Once you take the time to really build your mannequin and dress it up, it's almost like a wind-up toy to a certain extent, because you can just let it go. And it'll surprise you, and I promise you it's true. It will reveal itself. Because that part of your brain that is creating this character is waiting to talk to you, but you just have to give it a shape and a form. So once you build all of the small necessary components for your mannequin, plug it in. It'll light itself up. It'll start talking. It'll automatically react to another mannequin. If you have a mannequin that you really want to be just a jerk, the person you really don't like in your life, you just really want to see them get shot in the face, right? So you decide to write a jerk, but you have to make sure that person is seen that way. So you've got to put them across from somebody that's really nice, somebody that's really thoughtful, somebody that's really generous. Once you build that opposition, it'll light itself up. So it's just taking the time to construct the character from the thought, and then it'll come to life in itself. Now you kind of do that over and over again, and once that happens, it's like watching your own personal diorama.
Great. No, great point. So what you're saying, from what I'm understanding also, is you want to create a contrast. You want to create a contradiction, right?
Yeah.
You cannot show just black and establish a character. You have to show a white also to establish that character. And probably if you show more gray, those characters will become more flesh and blood, more three-dimensional, right?
Right. And once you have those hard-hitting points that sort of create your character, and you kind of got a name for this idea, then you can consider the world that you're putting them in, the circumstances that you're putting them in. If you're putting them in a submarine that's going to blow up in 20 minutes, or you put them in a skyscraper that's about to blow up, or you put them in a boat, wherever you put them, they will kind of reveal themselves after that as well. So it's what they want and what they need as they become more flesh and blood is really dependent on the world that you put them in.
Great. So since you're talking about the world that you're putting them in, now let me go to Isaac. Sorry, Jay, you have a question? Or you had something to add?
I wanted to just add that let's turn the wheel towards more towards producing.
Mm-hmm. I was about to go.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No.
No,
Please
so my thought was whatever Richard had said, right? To create that character and give it flesh and blood, give it dimensions, give it give it an environment to live in, to breathe in, and to bring out certain aspects. So Isaac, how would you translate that into your activity? Like, how would you start about, let's say, if Richard has created a complicated character or a complex character, right, that thinks in multi dimensions, how would you do that as a producer?
That's a very good question. So, one of the things that I think separates a good line producer from an acceptable but mediocre line producer is the desire to and the ability to tune in to the director and producer's creative vision, to know what truly matters to this story that they are telling, and what maybe doesn't matter, because I like to think this, I'm kind of sculpting in numbers, right? Like money is kind of like my clay here. So I'm trying to, like I say, use that left brain stuff, use those numbers to make sure that we're creating the thing that they want to create, to make sure that they're being supported in the ways that they want to be supported, that they have the resources that they need. So, for example, maybe what they really need, if this is a film that's just like all about the performances, maybe we need to put money into rehearsal time. Maybe we need to say, okay, we're going to sacrifice certain things that we'd love to have technically, that beautiful drone shot, that amazing Steadicam shot that we've got planned that goes for 5 minutes and through all these buildings. Maybe we say no to that so that we can get an extra couple of days so that they have more time on set with their performers. And there's just one example. There are many, but really, like, to be a good line producer is to think beyond just like, under budget, on schedule. Like, yes, that is necessary, but it is not sufficient. That is not the full game. And you need to have a sense of what the filmmaker's priorities are as you make these moment by moment decisions. Say yes to this, say no to this, say, guys, can we cut this? Because we're bleeding some money here, but without ever, you want to be trimming the fat. You do not want to be cutting into the meat of the story.
Got it. No, excellent. I think I like the way you differentiated between a good line producer and one not so good line producer, or a mediocre one. Right? So just to summarize what you have said, a line producer should also traverse into the creative space of the writer and director, right? And that would definitely help the whole process. Right?
Well, one really important thing to say there is that as a line producer, and I am now kind of graduating into producing, with March being involved, at a level beyond line producing. Thank you. As a line producer, it is never, ever my job or my place to try to shape the creative. It is to tune into the creative, to ask a lot of questions, to really get on the creative wavelength so that I can support it.
Right. So you said you're graduating from a line producer to a producer, right? Can you tell us the difference between those two? Like, where do you see line production ends and the actual production starts, or how do you call this? How do you call this journey, or how do you call this graduation journey?
Oh, that's a great question, and it's complicated a little by the fact that producers come in different. Producers can play very different roles and still be good producers. Some are. For example, Richard is producer because this is his creative baby. So he is there from the very, very beginning of development. That's not my role as a producer on this project, but it is to be involved in development once there is a script, once there are thoughts about how to make it. A film has 5 stages of its life. The first is development, writing the script, getting the key cast members on board, raising the funds. Pre-production, where you get everything else together that you're going to need to make the movie. Production, where you shoot it. Post-production, where you go from what you've shot to your finished final thing that can be exhibited, can be screened. And then into distribution. Going through the festival circuit, getting the buyer, making sure it finds its audience, doing all of that. So, as I say, a line producer exists in part of development and then full-blooded, all of pre-production and production. A producer is there for all 5 stages of a film's life.
Great. Well, thank you.
Like that.
I appreciate that. So basically, let me also give you a little background for the audience that this program is going to be telecast or is going to be delivered to. In their parlance, a producer is a guy who just spends money or who invests, right? So I think it's great that you gave that differentiation. So producer is not an investor. Producer is not a person who gives the money, but producer is the one who actually makes the film a reality from script to screen, right? So I think that's really,
beyond screen, and beyond into its entire life. Like films live very long lives. You may be negotiating rights to distribute the film to, say, Israel, and then that's another market you need to negotiate. You need to handle that distribution too. So yeah.
Right. No, great. No, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. So coming back to you, Richard, we talked about your characters, giving them flesh and blood, and the environments. So, I mean, for me, I think there's one important aspect that I also try to look into a film. It's called the subtext, right? So your characters are in an environment that they're doing this, they're doing that, they're talking about this. But I think subtext also matters a lot in terms of conveying to the audience, right? What is not spoken by the characters. So, what are your thoughts on that? Any insights and any experiences from your side?
No, I completely agree. The clearer and the more defined the subtext, the better the story ultimately. Now, there could be a difference, and I'm not quite sure what you're thinking. The difference between a subtext and a subplot. I think a subplot carries through the duration. Subtext could simply be a conversation, right? So it just really depends on what you're asking me. So is it the subtext or the plot?
Yeah, apologies. I should have been a little more clear.
Okay.
So, yeah, subplots. I mean, I want you to talk about both of them because I think both of them are very interesting. But for me, for example, subtext, right? You're seeing a movie about, let's say you're making a movie, a love story, right, between two characters. And they fell in love. Now, without showing the actual war, you can actually show that war as a part of the subtext. Let's say if the love story is happening in the background of a war, right?
Sure.
You don't show the actual war. You don't show the actual the destruction that war is creating, but you can introduce that as a subtext into the scenes, and then talk about it, right? So, for example, there's several movies that have done that, as I know. Where there's a filmmaker called Istvan Szabo. I don't know if you have seen his films. He's a Hungarian filmmaker. He had made a film called Confidence. I think I recollect that because that was the earliest movies that created a very big impact on me. So he's talking about a relationship that's developing between a man and woman in the pretext of in the context of a war. He never shows war in the film at all, but that war is always there, right from the beginning to the end as a subtext. So that's the thing that I was trying to bring about.
Okay. So from a writing standpoint, it's kind of like you're writing two stories at the same time. When you have a film that's got a lot of different subtexts, it can get confusing, but it also is challenging and much more rewarding as a writer. So you've got films that are very simple and straightforward, something along the lines of Blade, right? It's just a vampire hunter going out killing vampires, and those particular vampires are a little bit different than the other vampires, and that's it. Now, the slight subtext of that story is that he's conflicted in the fact that he hasn't been accepted by men or humans or vampires, right? So that's what he's juggling with while he's fighting these vampires. So that's his inner struggle as he deals with this external struggle. But then you've got the far end of the spectrum with films like Crash, right? I don't know if
Hmm.
you've seen that. It's
Yeah, I've
so
seen
many
that. Yeah.
sub stories and subplots that are interwoven ultimately to provide us with just some clarity about where we are. So it just kind of depends on the nature of the story that you're trying to tell, how you bring the subtext or that subplot to the surface. But I think a good rule of thumb is to think about how you are in your own individual life, right? You wake up, you go out, you have a job to do, and that's your main thing. But that job that you're doing may not be the most satisfying job that you have. There may be other things that you'd like to be doing. That is your subtext of your own life. So if you can consider how a character is something like a a structure like a home, the yard outside is the big story, and everything that happens inside the house is the subtext.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that, and that is a great answer. Uh, now going back to the subplots, right? So do you think too many subplots make the thing complex, or what is your rule of thumb?
Oh, well, I think that you're going to evolve as a writer. And I heard a woman say one time that you're everything you write is going to be better than the last thing that you wrote, right? Just by default.
Yeah.
So you may graduate to adding more subtext, more subplots to your stories. But yeah, if you yourself aren't having a great command over those parts of your story, then you can't expect your audience to understand it, and then it does get convoluted, and then you can lose
Yeah.
yourself in it. So for me, I kind of actually map out my stories on a little bit of a timeline. I'll create a chronology for each character from the beginning of when we meet them to the last time that we will see them. And if I do that for all of my characters, then I can see where those timelines are going to cross, where they may find themselves in the same scenes, or they may be having conversations talking about someone else. And if you can follow your individual character's lifeline, then it makes it a lot easier to bounce in between all of them. So at the end of the day, it really just depends on how comfortable you are and how many stories you think you can bring together in your own mind. But if I had to guess, I mean, what was it? It was Tom Hanks and Wilson, right? So it kind of just depends on the environment of the story that you tell. And then you've got, Avengers Endgame. It's like, oh my God, I'm so glad we watched all these other movies first, or this would have made no sense to me, right? So I guess to answer your question as a rule of thumb, it's what you're comfortable with. And I would say start off with two and see if you stay interested to the end.
Got it. So basically, I think I get the gist of it, and so you don't want to confuse the audience, nor you, right? And as long as the writer is not confused, the audience are not confused.
Exactly. And then
And
you want to make sure that everybody that's got a problem resolves it. You know what I mean? Try to
right,
resolve
right.
everybody's problems. Just a good rule of thumb. There's some cliffhangers that are okay. We're okay with that, especially if it's going to lead to a sequel or somewhere further down the line. But ultimately, your main character needs to get it fixed, whatever his problem is.
Right. So you do think that all the characters in your movie or in your writing should come to a conclusion, or should have their problems resolved by the end of it, and those conflicts should be resolved.
I like those kind of stories, but
Okay.
at the same time, I mean, everybody hated The Sopranos the way it ended, right?
Right.
So, I mean, they could argue
Sorry,
that,
we didn't watch it.
but oh really? Oh, well, you might be all right with that because it was a rough ride for some of us. But it's better to so what I like to think about is and now with post-COVID, it's a little bit harder to consider it, but I do believe in the life of the theater. I do believe that there will still be places we can go as a community and watch films. There may be fewer people in the rooms, but I believe it will still be a communal activity for us. And with that, you have to consider, as the writer, you have a responsibility. You're asking for an hour to 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours of somebody's life to sit down and watch this story that you created. So they should leave with something. And the least thing you could do is end it.
Mm-hmm.
You mean the franchise?
Huh?
Do you mean the franchise?
No, I just mean as a singular showing. You know, it should have an ending.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I wasn't talking about Sharknado.
Okay.
Right.
Can I say one thing to
sure,
subtext and subplot?
Come to you. Mm-hmm.
Just as a producer, one of the most important things for me when, I'm looking at, I work with a lot of new filmmakers, which is really exciting when you're seeing people, with talent, people that are ready to make that creative splash. Like, one of the things that, is a huge selling point to me about March is that, it tells, it tells its story with such incredible economy. It's an 80-page script. It is very satisfying. It does not feel rushed. It does not feel stripped down. But the thing you want to avoid as a first-time filmmaker is coming at it with your, 150-page script with, tons of characters. Now, you can think of exceptions to that, but as a general rule, like, you want to have your first film be relatively straightforward in the story that it tells. That really makes it easier. It's a chance for you to practice your craft. As Richard says, you grow in your craft, practice your craft with something more straightforward, reach your audience with something that is more straightforward. That is a very, very, very good way to start.
And thanks for the compliment, Isaac.
Great. So Isaac, just to continue or hold on that question, you said economy is something that you need to work with, right? So as a line producer or as a producer. So when you have a script of 80 pages, what are the things that come into your mind when you want to look into the economy concept of it, or economy part of it in the production process?
Okay. Wow. That's a good question. And to be clear, like, there are different kinds of economy. What I was talking about just then is, the economy of the writing, the storytelling. Even in 80 pages, the thing can become way too convoluted. In terms of, the economy of the budgeting, I think I definitely, I really get where Richard is coming from in terms of talking about, and you're talking about in terms of not clipping your creative wings and assuming you can't do things. At the same time, you want to have a ballpark of, how much do I think I have here? So, you can make a great film for any budget whatsoever from $0 to $300 million, right? But you cannot make any film at all well for any amount of money. Paranormal Activity, for example, was made for $11,000 and it was very successful. And I certainly enjoyed it on a creative level. I mean, you can't make Endgame for $11,000. You want to be considerate. You want to be considering as a first-time filmmaker, like, maybe you don't want a film that needs 1 million extras. Maybe you don't want a film that needs a ton of expensive locations. It's I think it may have been Richard saying earlier, but it's like, maybe you don't want a film with a ton of exterior night scenes, which will require big lights. Mm-hmm. Maybe you write towards locations that you already have access to. I mean, on my first film, Arranged, which is about the friendship between this Orthodox Jewish woman, Orthodox Muslim woman, as they meet because they're training to be teachers and they're going through their culture's different but related arranged marriage processes. Mm-hmm. So we shot for 17 days. 5 of those days were in our executive producer's father's school. 6 of them were in our executive producer's house. That's good producing. That's a great way to think as a first-time filmmaker. And it is written towards that. There are no night exteriors in it. So, thinking that way is a good way to begin, because if you succeed that first time, that's when you can bring out the grander, more expensive ideas, more logistically involved.
Great. That's a great example. So I think what our audience, the first-time filmmakers, also need to get from that is larger amount of budget not necessarily means a great movie, right?
Oh, no, it does not. No,
it does
in the
not.
same way you can make a great film for 11,000 or 300 million, you can also make terrible films for 11,000 or 300 million. And you see this all the time. I mean,
yes. So
Isaac, when you said you can make an end game for $11,000, yes, you can, but there are a lot of them on YouTube. You can make it, but not of the same quality.
Well,
Don't challenge the indie filmmaker.
No. Well, of course. No, that's another thing you learn is I never tell filmmakers these days, like, you can't make this film for that budget. What I will say is I personally wouldn't know how to make it for that budget. And you can make a great endgame parody for 11,000. And again, maybe, I don't know what favors you can call in. I'm just saying it'd be very, very difficult to make that film that has that same degree of polish, star power, everything for your 11,000. So I would advise not trying. Take your 11,000, make something great that fits into that.
Right. And now with the COVID situation, whatever they're making, they all look like that $11,000 budget videos nowadays.
Right.
So is it take away the expensive gear or take away the talented people from why do we see that loss of production quality in the videos we're seeing right now?
Well, one thing that I was thinking is in terms of budgeting, as a lower budget filmmaker, as a first time or second time filmmaker, as someone who may want to work, who may have experience but want to work with a lower budget to tell a more personal story that bigger investors, that studios might not be interested in, your budget is not just the things you spend money on, right? Your budget includes the things that you would need to spend money on if you were paying a going rate. And I would suggest you should still budget for them at that going rate and then figure out how to get them for free. Put a line in, even if you're getting all your camera gear for free, put a line in to think about what it would cost and then think, how can we get that for free? Think, what should we be paying for this location to rent it? Then get it for free. So you're still, you can make, if you have enough access to all the favors you kind of need, actually, as a lower budget filmmaker, you can make that $1 million film for 50,000. You just then need all of those favors to come into focus. And that's also why, as a line producer, it can be a lot harder to, it's a lot harder for me to budget something that is smaller because, if you give me a certain budget, if you give me $5 million, I don't need to rely on favors. I've got the money to go out and get the things for the going rate, right? So the budget becomes a lot more personal to the writer, the director, the producers, because I'm like, guys, what can you honestly get? Like, wishful thinking aside, what can you get? And I've seen that, on the film Pariah, directed by Dee Reese, who's now directing, Mudbound on Netflix, doing all that. We got 35 millimeter camera gear. All of our lighting was for free because the director of photography was Bradford Young, who, again, was just nominated for an Academy Award, and that was only 7 years after shooting Pariah. because he had that relationship, and because they spent so much time nurturing that relationship, getting the people at the biggest camera company in New York excited in this project. And Bradford was basically like, I've shot all of these commercials. I've brought a lot of business to you guys. I am cashing in the favor chip for this one film I truly believe in. So we got everything. And there's no way that I, as a line producer, could have talked them into it, because they'd be like, no, like, who are you? Even if we like you, who are you?
Right.
But, it's like, okay, you're a person that does serious business. We've got a lifelong relationship that we're building with you. I remember like being on a call with one of the rental guys there. It's like, can we afford to get this like big lighting setup for this night exterior? He's like, literally anything that's on our shelf right now, you can have. I was like, I like you. I like you. I like this production.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong in asking. Better ask than never ask, right? So many people are mostly the creative side of the production people. They are shy and they can't ask for favors. But there's nothing wrong in asking. Just
Don't
you
be
never
shy.
know what.
Yeah.
Never know what you're gonna get. All you need to do is ask. People can't read your mind. And
You're not going to lose anything by asking.
yeah. So going back to the budget, if you can reveal the budget of Pariah, you can, or else imagine if all those favors were not called in, and if Dearies and the DP made the same movie now, how much over budget that movie would be compared to what the budget was, maybe in a percentage figure.
I can't reveal a specific budget. I can say that the very serious distributors, film producers that a lot of them that team went out to laughed at them, but they did it. I can say, I think, without breaching any confidentiality, that film should have cost anywhere between 500 and 1,000% of what it actually did. Like maybe more. I mean, it really should have cost a whole lot more than it did. So, and that's production value. Like you want to call in those favors. You want it to look like you had more than you did. Not for the sake of showing off, but just for the sake of that production value. But that's also why it's very important when it comes time to sell it, to not reveal how low your budget was, so that the distributors don't lowball you.
So, gentlemen, how are we on time? We started 3 hours ago, but the interview has been for an hour. So
yeah, I think we have spent about an hour 15 minutes now. For audience who will be watching this as a recorded program, I think 1 hour 15 minutes is pretty good time. Maybe we can get back into an online session once your technology is fixed, JP. I think this is probably a good time to end this. I don't want to end this conversation. I hate to end this conversation. It's going so interesting and very lovely. But that's what I thought. And if you think otherwise, that's fine. But one question I had for Isaac. So JP talked about production values, right? So what are those, and how do you how do you get them better and better within a limited budget scope?
Oh yeah, great question. Yeah, I mean, production value refers to the overall feel of a film. It's like a lot of it is just how does it look? How good is the sound? How good is how good does the art direction look? It's all of those things. The professionalism, the quality of it. So what I always say is, as far as possible, as a first-time director, as a beginning director or producer, you know, good things have happened with people that were all doing their role for the first time, but in general, you want to get people, you know, like in the same way that, you know, they had Bradford Young at DP on Pariah, you know, he was not doing this for the first time. It was just one of his first features. So you want to, whenever you can, get very experienced people very interested in your project. You know, work around their schedules if you can. You know, that film was shot around Christmas and New Year's when no one else is shooting. So it's very easy for the camera house to say yes because most of their equipment wasn't working. It was easy for, you know, very experienced crew members to say, yes, I'll work for almost nothing because I love this project and I have time to, and by working on this project, I'm not losing money that I need to be making on those commercials, on those bigger productions. So the more that you can get really experienced people to work for a lot less than what they would because they are excited, the better.
Great. Thank you for those insights. I think those are really helpful.
Richard, are you there?
Yeah, Richard is here. I think he's on mute though.
Yeah, he turned off the camera. Okay. That's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Swami.
Yeah. So Richard is speaking, but he's on mute. So maybe he should get off the mute. Or can you take him off the mute?
I'm trying to. It's not. He needs to unmute it. Richard, if you hear us, turn the camera and.
Yeah, I think now he's off mute. No,
Okay.
he's still on mute. No, he's still on mute.
Okay, how about now? Can you?
Yes.
Click the camera on it. Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Yep.
So Richard, Isaac, JP, I enjoyed this conversation. I mean, this is great, you know, because you guys are on the ground, you're working live on movies and production. I mean, I keep talking with JP, and I learned a lot of things from him too. But this has been a great conversation for me, and I'm sure the audience will greatly enjoy this. So JP, do you should we schedule an online next week or maybe 2 weeks after this so that we can get in touch with our live audience and take their questions also? We can do that. But I think this has been a great conversation.
Yeah, this has been fun, man. You're good.
Yeah. Really appreciate your hosting, Swami. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, as you see, my knowledge is very superficial in movies. I just only watch.
No, it's not. No. You bring the passion of a true film lover, and that's such an important thing. You know, that is why we do this. You know, like I say, like every purchase order, every spreadsheet, everything that I do that is very mundane and not exciting is to serve something that is exciting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Passion comes first. Passion comes first.
Yes, passion, absolute passion. Yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry, before we go, one last question to both Isaac and Richard is, the majority of the audience watching this are mostly the first-time filmmakers who are trying to make a feature film or who are planning to switch from short films to feature films. So as a professional line producer or the first-time writer-turned producer, what is one or two tips that you would give a new filmmaker, or so that they can finish their project efficiently or under budget with higher production value? What are the few tips you can give to them before we conclude?
We'll go with Richard first.
Yeah. So
can you please turn your camera on, Richard? Click on the camera button.
The camera is on. I can see him.
Yep.
You can.
Okay. You just need to. Yeah, you just need to put yourself more into the frame, I guess.
Who, me?
Yeah, yeah. Maybe tilt your camera slightly down.
Down.
Yeah, there you go. No, no, no. It was better now. So yes. Tilt it like that slowly, slightly further. No, you're going up now. You need to go down. Yeah, yeah. There you go. Yeah, this is good. This is good. This is good. I like this.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
That's all right. Better late than never. Um, I guess that my tip would be that make sure you really, really, really like your story, because it's going to take some time to make it to the finish line. So make sure you really like your story. Uh, as far as the overall process goes, I hate to borrow a phrase from the president, but I mean, if you have good people around you, you can accomplish a great many things. So I would suggest that if you are an expert, make sure you're working with other experts in the things that you don't know. And it's okay to not know everything, because nobody does.
Great
So
point.
find the right people to work with, people that you trust, and strap in your seatbelt and be patient. And just know that the end result is on its way.
Fantastic. I like that. I like that.
Isaac?
Trust. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one piece of advice I give to anyone looking to get into this industry is make friendships. Like, by all means, like have professional contacts, network, that's all good. But over the long run, nothing will serve you better than true friendships. And, friendships that are forged by working with people and enjoying it. I don't just mean, it is a mistake to think that because someone's a friend, they'll be a great collaborator, and that can hurt your friendship too. But, I think about like the most rewarding projects that I've been on have come about as a result of friendships that have been nurtured over the years. Find your kindred spirits, and absolutely find the people who have more expertise in their field, in the industry. Nurture relationships with them, because that will really, really serve you well. As I say, like as a first-time feature filmmaker, you probably don't want everyone in every position to be doing that for the first time. You want to be working with experienced people that care about you, that believe in you as a filmmaker, and that care about and are tuned into your vision. You don't want anyone who's doing you a favor, right? You don't want anyone who's going to come in and say, well, I'm the experienced one, so this is how you should do it. But you want people that want to be in your service, that want to bring their craft and their expertise to create the thing that you have gotten them emotionally invested in. That's a great way to go. You can just have the most wonderful experiences as a first-time filmmaker, as a low-budget filmmaker. So much of it truly comes down to relationships that are not just those of convenience, but are those that really involve a great deal of heart.
Yep, and I attest to that because the first time I met Isaac was in 2013 and once in 15 or something like that, and we've never met since, and we've not been in touch much. But whenever we touch base, we made sure we kept in touch about our progress. And 7 years later, when I first met him, I was just making short films, and 7 years later now we are collaborating on this film, and I feel great about it. And we think that we are in a big nation, and it doesn't matter what we do, but film community is a very small community. No matter what you do, it will come around. So if you can't make good, don't make it bad. Keep the relations better, and always make sure you are increasing your network.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So
Thank you
thank you,
both
Richard and
again.
Isaac, for this. Yeah, thank you for this wonderful conversation, your lovely insights, and I would love to have more conversations like this, which are definitely helpful to our growth and my growth particularly, and looking forward to speaking with you, working with you. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Thank
Swami.
you,
This has been a
Isaac.
pleasure.
Uh,
Bye.